Shemai guys, welcome back to the Life to the Full podcast, the podcast that helps you make the most of your time here on Earth. My name's Dav Morse, I'm your host, and it's my job to educate and inspire, to equip people to live life to the full. We are in the middle of a series called 7 Tips You Must Ignore. We've done 7 financial tips which you absolutely need to ignore. We've done 7 physical health tips you should absolutely ignore. We've done 7 mental health tips you should absolutely ignore. And today, we're on 7 relational health tips that you definitely need to ignore. I thought we'd never get here, but here we are. And when I talk about relational health, I'm not simply talking about a romantic relationship between 2 people. Relational health, as I see it, involves relating to family, friends, children, work colleagues, wider society. It's important to have good, healthy relationships in every facet of your life. Good, solid relationships are correlated with longer and healthier lives. Healthy relationships are vital for our well-being. We are designed to live in relationship with one another, to care for and love one another. So the tips today are a mixture of couple tips and wider relational tips. But you definitely need to ignore all of them. It does get pretty controversial pretty quickly today because I have some hot takes on some things relational based. I have an extremely high view of marriage which not everyone shares, and if you don't agree, I'd love to hear from you and listen to your opinion. You can get in touch with me, Life to the Full podcast, or David Morse at Instagram. So here we are. Let's get going with 7 tips that you definitely need to ignore, relational health wise. Number 1, get rid of toxic people from your life. This is one I see all the time. If there are people around you that are dragging you down, then it's time to ditch them. You don't deserve to have all this negativity in your life. Leave them behind. You've outgrown them. It's time to move on. Now, there's a mental model which I've found challenging, interesting, inspiring, all at the same time, which is you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. The idea is that if you want to improve a certain area of your life, you should hang out with people who are above where you are so that you can drag you up. If you want to be a better triathlete, go hang out and train with triathletes who are better than you. If you want to be a better dad or husband, hang out around people who you admire in this area. If you want to be rich, hanging out with poor people all the time will almost certainly mean you don't reach your financial goals. And the converse is true. If you surround yourself with negative people, people who complain all the time, people who blame the government for not helping them, people who are miserable to be around, guess what? You're going to become more miserable whiny pants too. Even if you're the most positive, upbeat person, it's hard not to get dragged down. So surely if you want to improve yourself, be happier, be less stressed, then surely it's time to get rid of the toxic people from your life. This is the idea behind the advice, get rid of toxic people from your life. If you're constantly surrounded by people who bring out the worst in you because of their negativity or controlling behavior or the way that they belittle you, then how can it be bad advice to ignore, to get rid of these people from your life? The thing is, these are the people who most need you in their lives. The people who are the most negative, most critical, most toxic are the people who have been hurt the most, struggle the most, and need you the most. I know some people who are lonely and hurting, and they are emotionally draining to be around. But if everyone is abandoning them because they are difficult to be around, what does that do for them? I'm not advocating caring for everyone. and there certainly will be people in your life that you should distance yourself from. But don't make it a blanket rule. You should carefully consider how you can care for someone else who others are abandoning. Ask yourself, is this person someone I value and care for in my life? Think of old friends, family members, some of whom can be very negative in their attitudes, that you feel drained by. What responsibility do you have to care for them and look after the vulnerable in our society? Who are the people that need you the most? Do your best to serve them to the best of your ability. Don't just dismiss them because you don't feel happy after you spend time with them. Tip number 2 that you should definitely ignore is people that really love you will always support you. Now, the sentiment here is that if someone doesn't support your decision to do whatever you want in your life, then they don't really love you. It's hard to believe that anyone can follow this through to its logical conclusion and still stand by it as good advice. There are any number of destructive behaviours that my daughters could participate in that I would absolutely not condone, let alone support, exactly because of my love for them. I would never support my children in getting into gambling or drugs or sex work. I fully believe that if I supported those kinds of behaviours, then that would show an extreme lack of love for them. I would continue to love them and show kindness to them, even if they did go down these life paths that lead to misery. But I am sure as heck not going to encourage them down the path. I will support them on their journey back from the destructive behaviours. I hope that I raise them in a way that they will make good decisions, and I'll be able to get behind the decisions that they make. It's the same with friends. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do as a friend is to gently point out the error of someone's ways. I love the idea of having a red team. The concept is that a red team will point out all the flaws and objections in a plan and not be afraid to call you back from the brink of poor decision making. I try as much as I can to cultivate these loving relationships where people are free to challenge me and my actions, not just blindly support anything I decide to do. Do you have a red team in your life? Someone who loves you enough to call you out on some things rather than watch idly by or even support you on your self-destructive path? Number 3. This is to do with relationships. Don't settle. That's the advice you should ignore. Now is the time where it starts to really get controversial. You should absolutely settle when it comes to your life partner. Let me try and persuade you that not settling is awful advice and you should definitely ignore it. If I had taken the advice pushed on me not to settle because, after all, don't I deserve to have the very best? I may not be here today with almost 20 years of marriage experience because 15-year-old me was going to wait until Rachel Stevens from S Club 7 was willing to marry me. The idea that we can just choose whoever we want as our spouse and we shouldn't settle for anything less is mostly just fantasy. Or even when we're looking for a relationship and it turns out that the person we're interested in isn't completely flawless and we think we shouldn't settle for anything other than a perfect relationship. This is logical nonsense. And let me just put it on the record, I am far happier with my wife than I ever would be or have been with Rachel Stevens. The fact of the matter is, there is no perfect person. We all have flaws, so thinking that we'll wait to settle down until we find the perfect partner is pure lunacy that comes from watching too many Hollywood rom-coms, or maybe even listening to too much TikTok relationship advice. I'm not perfect, as much as my pride whispers otherwise to me. neither is my wife perfect. So in that sense, we have both settled for less than our fantastical, imaginary, ideal relationship. When you settle, I hate to have to break it to you, but however good a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband or wife you are, your partner has settled when it comes to you too. If you'll permit me to make a few assumptions, there's even more reason to believe that not settling will lead to a worse outcome. I'm not going to presume that when it comes to not settling, that you have some kind of goal or desire to, at some point, find a partner that you want to spend the rest of your life with. The longer you leave things before settling down, the smaller the pool of potential partner becomes. This is just mathematics. Oh, I'm such a romantic, viewing everything with a mathematical lens. If you want to have a long-term relationship that is lifelong, then you will, by necessity, have to choose someone who has these same values. The longer you leave things, the more likely it is that the people who would fit your worldview for a good partner are coupling up and getting married, leaving fewer and fewer options. You are far better off, in that sense, settling early on and then both committing to each other and deciding to make things work. The biggest predictor for marital success is two people both committing to the other and loving the other as much as they love themselves. And this leads me on to my next bit of advice that you should definitely ignore, and that is, don't get married young. This is advice you should definitely ignore, and let me try and persuade you why. Before I do, however, I don't want people to think that I'm saying that everybody should get married as young as possible. That's obviously ridiculous. Not everyone is wired the same way. Not everyone has the same goals and ambitions. But I am saying, don't get married young is not general good advice. And if it's your goal to have a stable, long-term marriage, then getting married early will improve those chances. My wife and I got married aged 22. My wife had just graduated, and I just qualified as a teacher. All of our physical possessions between us could fit into my car. We had no money. I hadn't started working after graduating yet. And here we are 19 years later, still married. I want to share briefly about what has worked for us in the hope that it can encourage some people and be a word of caution also. One of the big reasons I think people who want to marry should get married when young is that you have a chance to start building your life together early. When I got married, I realized how selfish and immature I was. All of a sudden, I had to think about what my wife wanted and how she should react to things. This was quite an adjustment. I'm still working on that, even now. And this was all before I'd even had much of a chance to build my own life, and my wife had had time to build her own life. If I had had another decade of building my own life with my own personal goals and projects, then incorporating another person into that life would have been far more difficult. I would have been far more ingrained in my habits and thought processes, and it would have involved even more sacrifice and effort to think about the other person, and things would be made doubly difficult by my wife facing the same challenges. By starting to build our life together early, it gave us a longer time to figure things out, and we each brought less baggage into the marriage. By getting married young, you can get to know your spouse and grow in love for them over a longer time, which in general leads to lasting marriages. Don't get me wrong, getting married young brought its own problems. There were times in the early days that we wondered how or if we were going to make it through. We were extremely blessed to be constantly surrounded by supportive and encouraging voices who were happy to share their wisdom and experience with us and keep us focused on the bigger picture, We had plenty of people praying for us, but a massive factor in us still being here today is that we both decided to stay married, whatever happened. We have never seen ending the marriage as an option, so therefore we have to figure things out. It makes me sad to hear of any breakdown in marriage, be it from the death of one spouse, infidelity, or two people just deciding to call it a day. Stable marriages are good for families and good for society. So consider making it a goal to get married young and stay married. Some of the objections I hear to this are, I was really dumb at 26. I would never have been mature enough to get married at 26. You only need to make one good decision followed by both making the next good decision to stay married. If you're financially not ready to get married, you don't need to have a lot of money. You don't need a really big wedding. You maybe not want to be unemployed, living at home with no prospects, but otherwise, you're fine. If you're used to living like a student, it won't be much different. So don't listen to the advice of don't get married young. Number 5, relationship advice that I'm definitely going to ignore is, I let my child tell me what they want. I let them say no to me so that you get used to saying no to people. Depending on the circumstances, I am definitely ignoring this advice. I understand that whoever said this was trying to be provocative, trying to get some attention on social media, and of course, this needs some discussion and nuance. That's why I love podcasts, especially this one, wink wink. You can take time to develop your thoughts rather than just simply reacting to short-form content. So, thanks for sticking with me thus far. This advice to ignore very much depends on the age of the child and the particular circumstances we find ourselves in. I don't take parenting advice generally from people who have fewer children than me. I'm happy if people with older children than I have, 9 and 5, want to push back, but this is the way that I see it. There are certain situations where there is absolutely no way I'm taking advice from or into account what my kids are saying they want. In certain situations, my kids don't get to say no to me. My goal as a parent is to raise polite, well-mannered, courageous, godly, intellectually curious, healthy, financially literate young women. And this is a process. When a child is kind of 2 to 4 years old, there is no doubt in my mind that I know best, and I know better than my child what's best for them. I'll start requiring little bits from them. They don't get to say no to me when it comes to certain things like safety and clearing the table after a meal and cleaning their teeth and any other number of requirements. I tell them what they have to do, and they have to do it. Now, as the child gets older, maybe between 4 and 10, I'll start listening to them and hear their point of view. And then I'll explain all the reasons why we're doing things my way. As they get even older, say 10 to 15, like I said, I'm not there yet, but the theory has worked out so far, then they get to negotiate things with me. I want them to learn rhetoric and persuasion, how to build an argument, and understand things from 2 points of view. So they begin their negotiations, and if they learn to persuade, then I'm willing to take into account their requests. Then, by the time they're 15 or more, then they start making their own decisions, living with the consequences of their mistakes. We'll give them a space so they can learn to fail in a safe environment, And if we've done a good job as parents, they'll be ready to face almost anything the world can throw at them. This is when they do get to say no to certain things. There will certainly be times where they still don't get to say no, like, no, I'm not letting you stay over at your boyfriend's house when his parents aren't there. There will be surely times where I listen to my children and they can get their own way, even when I think it's a bad idea. There will be times when they will be allowed to say no, but it doesn't start at the beginning. They need to earn that through developing a mature, competent lifestyle. 2 more to go. Number 6. This is a quick one. Number 6 and 7 are kind of tied together. So, number 6 advice of relationships that you should definitely ignore is, your soulmate will complete you. Find the one. Or any version of this tip that you might hear in the rom-coms, you definitely need to ignore it. Coming from a man who loves a good rom-com, this is the kind of tip which implies a standard so high for a partner that no human could ever hope to achieve. It's holding people back from good, healthy relationships. We are all flawed. We are all incapable of completing someone else. The biggest problem here is that people use the converse argument to end relationships that could otherwise have continued to serve both partners. Because of the unrealistic expectations of perfection and relying on another person to meet needs that we have, that only a perfectly loving, all-knowing, full of grace and love being could meet, we are left with disappointment, and we conclude that the only way forward is to start again and to try to see if someone else is able to complete us. I've heard from many people that happiness equals expectations minus reality. And so by having expectations of another person that are far too high for anyone to meet, we set ourselves up for failure. There is one person that can meet all our needs, but we'll leave that to the final episode in this mini-series. Then this ties into tip number 3. How do you know who is the one for you? You look at your marriage certificate. That person is the one. And doing all that's in your power to preserve that sacred relationship is in everyone's best interests. Number 7. 7th tip that you definitely need to ignore when it comes to relationships is, when it's true love, you'll never argue. It sounds idyllic, doesn't it? 2 people in perfect harmony, gliding through life with zero conflict, all rainbows and sunshine. I remember a couple from my church when I was a kid saying that they never argued, and I was impressed by that. Now I'm not so sure it's impressive, because, let's be honest, it's not love, it's a fairy tale, not even a good one. This advice isn't just bad, it's destructive. Similarly to number 6, it sets people up for disappointment and robs them of the riches that real imperfect love brings. First of all, arguments are normal. They're a sign of 2 individuals with their own thoughts, opinions, and emotions. Unless you're dating a carbon copy of yourself, and let's hope you're not, although sometimes I think it would be easier. It wouldn't let me grow so much personally in areas I desperately need it. Differences will arise. Healthy conflict is not a bug in the system of love, it's a feature. It shows that if you care enough to voice your needs and opinions instead of sweeping them under the rug, silence might look like peace, but often it's just avoidance. Now let's think about this practically. 2 people committing to life together come with baggage, different upbringings, different values, and let's face it, different ways of loading the dishwasher. Remind me to tell you about the Enneagram Type 1 dishwasher people at some point. Love doesn't erase those differences. It teaches you how to navigate them. If you never argue, chances are one of you is suppressing their feelings. And suppressed feelings, they have a nasty habit of festering into resentment. The other problem with this advice is that it sets a standards no one can meet. The first time you and your partner have a disagreement, you're going to think, oh no, this isn't true love, we're doomed. That's nonsense. True love isn't about never fighting, it's about how you fight. Do you listen to each other? Do you try to understand, or are you waiting for your turn to speak? Do you reconcile, or do you let bitterness take root? Conflict, when handled well, strengthens a relationship. It teaches you about yourself and your partner. It's in the messiness of love, the awkward conversations, the misunderstandings, the apologies, that intimacy grows. You learn what makes your partner tick, what they value, and how to love them better. Look at the best relationships you know. Are they conflict-free? Probably not. They've weathered storms together, come out stronger on the other side, and learned to love each other through the rough patches. So let's ditch the fairy tale. Love isn't about avoiding arguments, it's about learning to argue well. It's about grace, forgiveness, and growth. True love doesn't hide from conflict. It embraces it as a chance to become closer, deeper, and more real. Next time someone tells you true love means never arguing, feel free to set them straight. Send them this podcast episode. Real love is gritty, messy, and beautifully human. And that's far better than any fairy tale. So there we have it, 7 pieces of relationship advice that you should definitely ignore. I hope I've provoked you a little bit to think about some of these things. And if you disagree or agree, I'd love to hear from you. Get in contact. Find me on Instagram. I am David Morse or Life to the Full Podcast. I'd love you to send me a little DM, ask me a question, share your opinions, and maybe I can address your comments at a future date. We've got one more episode left of the series, and that is 7 spiritual health tips you should definitely ignore. Looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to Christmas. So, if I don't see you before Christmas, have a good one. Peace out, and enjoy your time with your loved ones. Till next time, peace out.